Welcome to the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast, brought to you by Arihanta Institute. Listen to top figures in the fields of Jain studies, religious studies, vegan studies, and social justice discuss pressing issues of everyday relevance. Together, let's move beyond the realm of personal spiritual growth and connect philosophy, religion, and spirituality to the important task of caring for the well-being of society. Learn about your world and how to change it on the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast.
Welcome to the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast. I'm Professor Christopher Jain Miller, and I am very happy to be joined here by my friend and colleague, Shivani Bothra, who is the Assistant Professor of Religious Studies and the Bhagwan Suvidhinath Endowed Chair in Jain Studies at California State University, Long Beach. I'm really excited, Shivani, to interview you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. It's really a great opportunity to be here to talk to you and to discuss some of my research, interesting things. And I'm extremely happy to talk about this course on compassion because I really feel this, not only the topic is very close to me, but I think compassion is a topic that is completely atheistic in nature. People might feel that, they don't associate with a specific religion or with a specific tradition or with a specific prescribed way of life. But compassion is something which can be so universal. And I really commend you for even thinking about these modules on compassion. So I'm glad to be here and to talk about this course.
Well, we're very happy to be here with you. Shivani Bothra is teaching in our Compassion Studies initiative a course called Compassion to Self and Others in Jain Householder Life. So today we're going to talk about this course, what it is that Shivani is going to be teaching, but we're also going to give you a chance to meet Shivani and learn about her research, her background, what compassion means to her, and how you can generate more compassion in your life. So before we begin, Shivani, why don't you let the listeners get to know a little bit about you? I know you. I've traveled with you. I've been to your house in India. I've been to conferences with you, and now you're teaching in the Compassion Studies Initiative. We have seen a lot of each other. I want the listeners to get to know you as well. So can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you teach, what and why you research what you research, and really whatever you want to share with our listeners?
Well, thank you, Chris, again. So I am born in a Jain family, but not a really conservative family. So my parents migrated right after my birth from Rajasthan to Kolkata, which is a cosmopolitan city. I didn't grow up with a strong sense of Jain identity. So when I now look at Jainism or the Jain tradition or academics, I feel that I have the outsider perspective because for 22 years of my life, I was just growing in India as an Indian or as, maybe as a false identity of being Hindu because of the people around me, people in the apartment building and things like that. It was only after 22 years of my marriage, after 22 years when I got married and I was in Jaipur, that I was initiated into the Jain norms and developed a sense of Jain identity. But that's also not, a strong identity. Right after the marriage, there were other challenges to address, but it was again after 10 years of my marriage when I came across a Jain nun called Sadhvi Rajimati, who in a way initiated me into a real understanding about what is Jainism and what Jains are supposed to do and how I can be a good Śrāvika. So till then, I just moved on from being a woman to being a Jain Śrāvika. Now, then as I was moving with this nun, trying to be a good Śrāvika, I had a close interaction with this nun. I did a lot of peace walks with her. This way, gradually, as I was into my own and developing my own understanding about the whole tradition and the corresponding traditions that were in India, when I came across International Summer School for Jain Studies, where I met Chris. So from being a Jain Śrāvika, from developing a Jain sense of identity, I got academia appealed to me. My conversations with Chris and many other students who came from USA, Canada, and Europe, I gradually developed a keen interest in understanding Jainism through books, and then seeing how community practices and how it is presented in the books. That's when I joined Florida International University in 2011 to get my second master's degree in religious studies. So the story begins from here. And then when I went to New Zealand for PhD, the big question which we all encounter in our lives when we want to do a PhD program, what should I work on? What is my real interest? That's when I kind of understood my strengths, being a part of the community and also being like I have both the perspectives of being an insider and an outsider. Insider because I grew up in the community, and in the past 7, 8, 9 years, I had familiarized myself with monks, nuns, and the fourfold community. Being an outsider means I still didn't know the real practices. So, and then children were one thing that always I wanted to understand. Growing up as a migrant child, I wanted to understand how traditions survive. What is it that we are still imbibing, and what is it that we are still moving on with? So looking around, I realized one thing that if you talk to Jains in India, the answer that they will give that our tradition survives because of monks and nuns. They are the ones who gives us the discourse, and that's how we continue to learn and practice. But when I was in the United States, I realized that the reason why tradition survives, an important component here is the Pathshala or the Sunday schools. So that really piqued my interest, and I delved into a study of Jain migration and challenges of migration the Jain communities face and how they address the challenges. Of all the different challenges that Jains address, the most important I found and very useful topic to research upon was how tradition is transmitted to the newer generation because of a different context, different methodologies and pedagogies. The whole language is different. And how they work around these changes in order to make the tradition appealing to the young ones. And starting from American Jains, I realized that actually this challenge is not just among the immigrant Jains who have left their country. Even those Jains who are born in India, they are grappling with this whole idea about transmitting their tradition and the sanskar and values to the next generation. So then I looked at Jains in India. But then I realized that not only those Jains who have migrated across India, but actually even within a city like Jaipur, where Jains were so much concentrated in the older part of the city, which they call Jaipur Shahar. And then when Jains moved to suburbs, of course, the scale is different and the details are different, but challenges were very similar to Jains who moved across in the suburbs. The question of transmitting religious values to the next generation and how to keep their tradition vibrant, surviving, and alive. So that's how I delved into this research where I looked at local Jain communities and their Sunday schools. I looked at regional Jain communities and their Sunday schools, and I also looked at American Jain communities and their Sunday schools. So I feel that it is kind of a cycle that started with me as a migrant Jain child, and it ended into my research and dissertation of comparing Sunday school across different traditions.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I can really see how your own life experience led you to pursue the kind of research that you do. And you and I share a commitment to the anthropological and kind of ethnographic and cultural study in various ways of the tradition, the living tradition. And I think you have a really particularly interesting perspective on Jainism, on Jain philosophy, and on just living the Jain way of life because you've seen it and studied it both in yourself as well as in within communities all over the world. And part of what this class that you're going to be teaching is going to be focusing on really how to apply these principles. Before I get into that, Shivani, the class that is part of the Compassion Studies Initiative. It's about compassion to self and others in Jain Householder Life. Let me ask you this. What does compassion mean to you in particular, personally? And I'm sure it's been formed by your experiences studying the Jain tradition and other traditions, but what does it mean to you personally?
So again, Chris, here, as I said, that my first initiation into actually Jain studies or understanding Jainism or to be even a Jain Śrāvika was my influence of Sadhvi Rajimati, who is 92 years old now, who lives in a small town of Nokha near Bikaner. So when I looked into her eyes for the first time, that's when this is more than 15 years ago, maybe 17 or 19 years ago, that's when I realized that how compassionate her eyes are. So for me, just to understand whether a person is compassionate or not, you just need to look at the person's eyes. Eyes will never give you a false impression. So and then the way she handheld me and without any feeling that, I was so old by that time, maybe in my early 30s, and still I didn't know anything about Jainism as such. And the way she guided me into a meditation, which was for forbearance, which was for developing amity and friendliness. She guided me into a meditation of compassion. So that was my starting point of entering into Jainism. It was not through scriptures. It was not through a code of conduct. It was not through, the jargon of Jainism, but it was mainly through practical application of some of these concepts into how we can apply in daily life. So I was extremely thrilled when you offered me that, if I can teach a course on compassion, because my own beginning with Jainism has my first step has been through compassion. And through a person, like we know Dalai Lama is regarded as a true embodiment of compassion. In the same way, we can say for this nun Sadhvi Rajimati, who is 92 years old right now within the Therapant Shwetambar tradition, is regarded as an embodiment of compassion. So compassion, to bring the long story short, compassion for me is action. It's like, expressing sympathy in action, not just kindness, not just verbal, but how small acts can make difference in people's life. And those small acts need not be monetary or measured in terms of monetary. It could be just holding someone's hand and guiding that person. It could be just giving your hand to help someone cross the road. This is compassion for me.
Yeah, it's amazing, really beautiful and touching story, because, we really focus on compassion in action in this whole Compassion Studies Initiative. And everybody I've interviewed so far who's teaching or involved in this initiative at Arihanta Institute, including you, has described some kind of early encounter in your life or in your Jain studies or whatever, where you didn't learn it necessarily through scriptures per se, but you learned it through an actual living human being who is embodying compassion, is exuding compassion. Obviously, you described Sadhvi Rajimati's eyes as really gleaming with compassion, and that you were led into compassion through the spiritual work you did with this person, not necessarily through scriptures per se, although, of course, I'm sure I'll interview somebody at some point who read a Jain scripture and was led to that. But, I'm always struck by how it is that these personal life experiences are really the most powerful between other humans, and having compassion being something that's driven by our interaction with other compassionate people. It spreads. Just as negativity and other things can spread, so too can compassion. And as you say, there's so many ways to put it in action. And really, that's what your class is about: compassion to self and others in Jain Householder Life, that you're going to be teaching at Arihanta Institute. Can you tell us a little bit, just kind of an overview of this course? And I mentioned you mentioned a word earlier at the beginning of the interview, Śrāvaka or Śrāvak. And so for those of our listeners who don't know what that means, maybe you can unpack that word a little bit for them, because I
Yeah.
think it really ties into what this course is about.
Sure. So, as it's known that a Jain community is fourfold, that there are four pillars that combines together to form this Jain community, where monk, which is Muni or Sadhu, nun, which is Sadhvi or Aryaka, layman, who is called Shravak, and lay women is called Shravika. So a Jain community comprises of monk, nun, layman, and lay women. Lay women, me being a lay woman, I call myself Shravika. So, and this course is about Shravak, about a book that Ācārya Tulasī wrote in the last decade of his life, which was in his 80s, which is called Śrāvaka Saṃbodha. And I am drawing from this course. So a bit more about Śrāvaka Saṃbodha. Again, here I start with an anecdote or a story that led to the composition of this huge text called Śrāvaka Saṃbodha, which forms the basis of our course on compassion. So the term Śrāvaka Saṃbodha means guiding the Shravak. It's like a handbook, a manual in which Ācārya Tulasī writes down certain, prescribes or writes in detail with lot of references from the Jain text and scriptures about what a Shravak should be, how a Shravak should be, or what are the responsibilities of a Shravak in day-to-day life towards oneself, towards one's family, and towards the society. But before he came up with this text, he was Shwetambar Terapanth, ninth religious head monk, Ācārya Tulasī. So his work was to give discourses and to lead the community, right? One day, a senior layman who is called Shravak approached Ācārya Tulasī, and he told Ācārya Tulasī that I have a request to make. Ācārya Tulasī was known to listen to people, regardless of Jains, non-Jains, but he would always invite people to speak and think over the questions and the suggestions. So this layman says that all the discourses that you and your group of monks and nuns give are fantastic. They are mostly talking about monks, lifestyles of monks. We understand that, monks are exemplaries. They are role models for us. We all want to emulate their lifestyle, but we are householders and we need to know something that directly relates to our lives. Even though we aim to we have a higher goal of being monk once in lifetime, even though we want to reach higher level of religious practices, but yet your discourses will be more useful to us if you directly connect it to our lives and to our context and situation. This layman's, proposition really struck Ācārya Tulasī when he was in his 80s. And he decided to create a text which is completely devoted to lay practices. And that's why he calls the text Śrāvaka Saṃbodha, like guideline or a handbook for lay people, Shravaks. And so I did some research on this and wrote a 13,000 word article based on this text, Śrāvaka Saṃbodha. So one of my main questions that I wanted to understand by my reading, research, and writing of Śrāvaka Saṃbodha was that in the medieval times, both Digambar Acharyas and Shwetambar Acharyas have written enormous amount of writings for the lay community in the form of different Śrāvaka Achars, right? Williams makes a list of around 22 or 24 Śrāvaka Achars for Shwetambars and a similar 24 or 28 Śrāvaka Achars for Digambars. And even in this exhaustive list, they miss out on so many other Śrāvaka Achars that were composed in that period of time. So why did Ācārya Tulasī need to write another Śrāvaka Achar? I call it as a modern Śrāvaka Achar. What was the need? Why didn't he refer to that layman? Go and read Hemchandra Acharya's Yog Shastra. Go and read Haribhadra Suri's Yog Bindu. Even that prescribes, qualities of laymen and what and how a lay practices are guided. But then Ācārya Tulasī didn't do that. Instead, he sat down and developed a Śrāvaka Aachar, which relates to 20th century, 21st century lay community, in which he tries to make, like his usual habit, he tries to, whatever projects he take, whatever writings he do, whatever initiatives he take, he always has this desire to transcend the boundaries of the Theravada and the Jain and to include Jains and non-Jains in his projects. So he writes this in Hindi because he knows that people can understand. They don't have to go through the Prakrit and Sanskrit manuals to know what they should be doing. Then he uses a poetic form because he realizes that if something is presented in a lucid format, in an interesting rhythmic format, people would be interested to read, learn, and memorize. And so his composition of Śrāvaka Saṃbodha was actually intended for people to memorize it, to read it during the Samayik, the 48 minutes of sitting in equanimity, which Jains are supposed to do, and to transfer these values to the next generation. Because he wrote it in Hindi, because he included the challenges of Jain communities who had already started migrating in his own lifetime. So, and with his 70 years of experience as being a monk and traveling barefoot from the northern part of India to southern tip, from eastern part to western part, he gathered all these experiences in creating Śrāvaka Saṃbodha as a modern form of, lay, a prescription for lay practices, which is what I will use in my course of compassion.
Yeah, well, thank you.
I don't believe, Chris, it's been such a long, explanation. I didn't intend to be so long.
Oh, no, it's great because you've given us such a great overview of what this course is about. I mean, there's a lot to unpack, and I appreciate that you did it because not all of our listeners will necessarily be as familiar with the Jain tradition as others. And so you've shared with us who Ācārya Tulasī is. I mean, such an important and global thinker in the Jain tradition, in the modern Jain tradition, whose work was appreciated and continues to be appreciated all around the world by both Jains and non-Jains, and whose writings have been so impactful, whose movement to really get people to improve themselves and improve the world has been so impactful around the world. And now there's this text, Śrāvaka Saṃbodha, that is, as you say, in Hindi, that you're going to be able to unpack for our students, which they might not otherwise have access to, and a text that can really teach them to live a better, more spiritual lifestyle and a more compassionate lifestyle, as you have described here as well. So I'm so glad that you provided that extensive overview. I have such a deep respect for Ācārya Tulasī and the Theravada movement and this kind of global movement that it has led to all the way into the present. And so I feel really lucky that you're teaching this course for us, Shivani, and as part of the Compassion Studies initiative. And if you don't mind, what I would like to do now is just go through some of the main parts of the course. It's a 4-part course. So you can tell us a little bit about what students might expect as they encounter this course and they go through the material from Śrāvaka Saṃbodha. So class 1 is called Jainism and Compassion, the Lay Mendicant Relationship. What are you going to teach the students here? And what does this have to do with Jainism and compassion?
So basically, first of all, the whole course here, it kind of encapsulates a Jain way of life. But like, as I said, it's not just related to Jains because it is the whole idea of compassion is universal. And we want to develop that compassionate and harmonious society by integrating Jain ethical principles into daily life. So starting from the first class, like Jainism and compassion, lay mendicant relationship, Ācārya Tulasī in his book tries to unpack the term Śrāvaka. We know that Śrāvaka means a layman, right? A householder or a layman. But actually, if you look at the etymology of the term Śrāvaka, it is actually listener. Person who listens intently, who listens carefully. So who is a listener? Listener is the Śrāvaka, and who is the speaker is the monk. So monk will speak something that will benefit the listener or the Śrāvaka. So in this lay mendicant relationship, the whole idea about compassion here is that the teachings that the monk is giving, if the monk gives these teachings with a certain compassionate emotion, with this positive thinking and hope that it will benefit the Shravaks. On the other hand, when the Shravak is listening to it intently, with a positive thinking and with this goal of applying those principles into one's daily life, this is how I'm trying to first lay the foundation of lay-mendicant relationship here.
Yes, that's great.
Because this lay-mendicant relationship is not just limited to giving alms or giving food, clothing, and shelter. That is one aspect of it. The other and deeper aspect, the way I look at this component is that if you are going to a monk and sitting in the discourse, or a nun and sitting in the discourse, and if you are not taking the teachings compassionately or viewing that compassionately and then applying that, then the whole relationship is only limited to dan, which is offering, and then they accepting the dan. But this whole idea, this first module takes it to a completely different realm and level, that giving and taking is one thing, but how you implement that is another thing.
Wonderful. Yes. And so this first class really sets us up to be listeners in a sense, and to listen to these teachings of Ācārya Tulasī, from what I'm understanding, and to be listeners who really want to develop compassion and listen compassionately in order to live more compassionate lives. And a lot of what we've talked about in this Compassion Studies initiative is that in order to extend compassion to others, we also have to be compassionate to ourselves. And part of that is listening intently and absorbing, as you say in your course syllabus, these ethical teachings in a way that not only fosters compassion for the world, but compassion for oneself. And so going into class 2 then, Jainism and compassion, you talk about the 4 rests of a householder. Can you tell us what the 4 rests are of a householder and how this relates to developing compassion?
Yes, so certainly, Chris, before coming to the second module, I would like to add one more thing in the first module, that, by emphasizing on the term Shravak as a listener, it is also to make the person, develop that the capacity to be a good listener, not only in the courses or monks. It's a general attribute that one needs to develop. That is, how one can be a good listener. So through this course, we are not just focusing on listening, that one aspect of listening that Ācārya Tulasī is expecting, that through the mendicant and a lay relationship, that you listen to the monks, but actually it is trying to develop an overall understanding of how one should be a good listener. Because one of the beauty about Śrāvaka Saṃbodha that I feel is that Ācārya Tulasī redefines the term dharma. And this is also going to be the basis of the first class, that how we understand dharma. Like if we look at Buddhism, dharma is what? It's reliable teachings. It's teachings that Buddha gave. Dharma is also duty. And dharma is religion, prescription, practices. There are so many different understanding of the term dharma we have, right? But Ācārya Tulasī says that if you completely read the Śrāvaka Saṃbodha, then you will understand that dharma is not just limited to what you have known thus far, but it is actually awareness. You do each and every activity with awareness. That is dharma. Whether you are listening or you are eating or you are drinking, each activity, if done with awareness and full emotion attached to it, that is what is dharma. That's one thing that comes out of the Śrāvaka Saṃbodha. So now talking about the second module. But Chris, before we discuss these 4 modules, I would also want to say briefly about the methodology that I planned for this course, like how my class is going to be.
Yes, please do share with us, as we've just begun going through it. So we would love to hear more about this.
So if you pick up any scriptures, whether across any religious tradition, stories are one thing that really appeal to stories and narratives. And Jain literature is again filled with narratives and stories. Yeah, and since this whole talk is about, individual compassion and drawing from Śrāvaka Saṃbodha, so the only text that is a part of the Agam or the Jain scriptures, which is called Upasak Dasha, in which Mahavir himself talks about 10 outstanding Shravaks, right? I can't, of course, discuss 10 Shravaks in one module class, but I wish I will start each class by discussing the story of only first Shravak that Mahavir really hails, the 24 Tirthankara in Jainism, and all the teachings are recorded of what Mahavira had once spoken or expressed. So Mahavir talks about Anand Śrāvaka in this book as the first outstanding Śrāvaka and who was contemporary of Mahavir in his lifetime. I have organized the story into 4 different classes. So we start in the first class and second class. So this is one method in which Jain monks and nuns usually start their discourse. They start in the first day of Chaturmas, they start with the story, and till the end of the 4 months, they continue the same story, like a episode or a serial. So for me in this course, I plan to do it in such a way that I start the story of Anand Śrāvaka, the layman householder Anand, and within these 4 classes, I will complete the story. So the first few, 10 minutes is, and within that story, our focus will be the elements of compassion and what is it that made Anand Śrāvaka as the first outstanding Śrāvaka in the Jain, text called Upasak Dasha. And then there will be lecture explaining each component, followed by a quiz, some questions and discussion, and the normal pattern.
That sounds great. Yeah, I mean, walking students through with a story is so compelling because the stories keep us engaged and they keep us listening so well, right? We want to hear the story, we want to hear the next part, and we want to hear how it all relates to living these Jain principles in everyday life. So this is a wonderful approach and a wonderful pedagogical approach to teach Jainism in compassion. And so, yeah, so you'll go through class 1 then, I suppose, and you'll be teaching us about what it means to be a Jain listener, Śrāvaka. And then you get to class 2, where you're talking about the 4 rests of a householder. Can you tell us how that fits into the second part of the class here?
Yeah. So Ācārya Tulasī, as we know, it's all about householders. So he introduces 4 rests using a metaphor from Sthanang Sutra. He compares the householder's burden to a laborer who carries a heavy load. Now, how do we connect it with the present circumstances? You pick up any book regarding meditation, why meditate. The first paragraph is usually talking about that our fast-paced lifestyle is filled with stress. We are running from post to pillar, trying to multitask, trying to do this. It's basically we are like laborers with a lot of burden on our head. It's not seen, but it is so subtle that, we carry the burden, but we don't want to associate ourselves with laborer, right? We are always doing one work after another, trying to accomplish one thing after another. And in doing all that, we are under stress. We are under, we also invite diseases and other modern disease problems. So here Ācārya Tulasī, through this metaphor of laborer, is trying to show the picture of a man, an individual that, how in big cities or how in one's life, people are always running around trying to do something. So there needs to be a point of rest. What is this point of rest is what this module talks about. So it is basically to include small vows. Like if I am a lecturer or if I'm a professor or if I'm talking all the time, at the end of the day, I'm sure my mouth will feel dry. I will be tired of speaking all the time. So by taking small vows, even if I try to balance time, there will be some period in my day's routine where I will not speak at all. I will experience silence. There will be some hours in the day when I will not use my computer or my laptop. So by taking these small vows, one is trying to remind oneself to slow down, to rest yourself, to not even while eating, we are using our phones. Even while watching, eating or drinking or talking to someone, we also are working on our computers. So the way today's lifestyle is, we are moving far away from being compassionate. That's not being compassionate to oneself, right? That eating, drinking, phone on the hand and laptop in front of us. We are trying to do 4 things at the same time. It's absolutely, we are ill-treating ourselves. So Ācārya Tulasī is saying that don't put yourself like a laborer who is always working. Maybe the laborer doesn't have a choice, but you can make informed choice and apply some vows, apply samayik, where, you can sit in equanimity, where you completely shut yourself from the outside world. So without using this as a ritualistic thing, but how one can apply this in a modern context is the whole idea of this module.
Yeah, and I really like this because it's giving these rests, what are called rests, to the household.
And that's what we actually need in today's modern, fast-paced lifestyle. We need to rest. And we need to really understand the meaning of rest. Rest is not sitting in front of a laptop and watching a film. It's how, in a better way, one can rejuvenate and increase your working efficiency.
Yeah, and it seems to me that, when we're connected to each other and ourselves in such a good way, as you're describing with these 4 rests in this section, that we are able to be not only compassionate to ourselves, but it's easier for us then to extend compassion to others, right? So in class 3, then you move forward to Jainism and compassion, the 3 desires of householders. So we had the 4 rests, and now we have the 3 desires. And I think these are also derived from Stananga Sutra. Can you tell us about what are the 3 desires, and how does this fit in with our will to be more compassionate human beings?
Yeah, so these desires actually, as mentioned in Stananga Sutra and in Śrāvaka Saṃbodha, are called 3 manorath. That means 3 desires that every individual is supposed to always have. So the first, which is renouncing material possession to embrace a minimalistic lifestyle. We all talk a lot about aparigraha, limiting possessions, to have a minimalistic lifestyle. These are some of, even though rooted into traditions, aparigraha or limiting possessions. But in a modern context, we use the term minimalistic lifestyle. So again, how we can be compassionate towards the environment by limiting our desires. How we can be compassionate towards every little thing that we do, just by rethinking or by re-questioning when we go to the shop, when we go for shopping, that do I really need this? Is this really something that is most important? So the idea is not just to give away things and try to be aparigraha, but the idea is to, before acquiring, the idea is to, before purchasing, you need to reconsider. So that's a minimalistic lifestyle which every Shravak or every individual, and this again, goes back to the idea of individual responsibility. So, in this course, we ask several questions. What is individual responsibility? Because in today's time, earlier people had this strong sense of identity and responsibility towards family. But in today's time, it's unfortunate that we see that people are becoming more self-centered. The whole concern is regarding individual. Even though, Jainism talks about individual upliftment or individual, practices. But we have to understand that with these individual practices, the impact is on family, how the impact is on society. Because if you look at Ācārya Tulasī's Anurat movement, or if you look at an inverted pyramid, just imagine a tree or a plant. When we want to nurture a plant, a small plant, or we want to water a plant, we don't water the plant from top. We want to nurture the roots. We want to water the roots. We want to keep this foundation strong. So individual nurturing is important for a strong foundation. And this individual nurturing will help that individual to be more responsible towards family. And responsible families will, in an advanced level, help in creating a responsible society or a responsible community, which will later on make a nation responsible. So through these small practices, Ācārya Tulasī was wanting to create responsible Śrāvaks. In order to be an individual, a responsible Śrāvak can lead to, responsible society, which would lead to a responsible nation. So these three desires of householders, like having a minimalistic lifestyle, always having this goal of being a mendicant, because if you have this goal, your role models are mendicant who have renounced everything. So in some way, you still, are always aspiring for that race of renunciation. When you develop that idea strongly, that's when you are able to give things away. You are able to develop a strong understanding of renunciation than always developing a desire or a wish to accumulate things. And then finally, which is overcoming the attachment of the body and fear, overcoming the fear of death, in the sense that the Jains have a strong concept of sanlekhna, which is in simple terms, it is like you fast until you die. But if you look at philosophically, if you look at the basic understanding of what is sanlekhna, it is no attachment for your life and no attachment for death. It is gradually withdrawing yourself from any form of attachment, either to material things or attachment to people or attachment to your own body. So through this, we want to develop compassion, in the sense that if we have strong passion for something, then we can't have compassion. So if I will have strong passion or desire for material belongings or for people, then that compassion will not be a compassion in true sense. The moment we develop the understanding of detachment, that is when, the real, genuine compassion will flow through. So through these three desires for householder, we would cultivate the idea of actually, genuinely being compassionate beings.
Yeah, it's almost like, I like the way you put that. It's almost like by giving up the objectification of things and people and all the things that people objectify in life, you come to a sort of intersubjectivity that then allows for compassion to just naturally arise. So I'm really inspired by that. And I think we can say it, and when we're at our best, we experience those moments of intersubjectivity and of compassion with others.
Yeah. Yes. No, I really like the way you wrap up the whole thing in few strong sentences. I wish I could.
My job as the interviewer is to listen to you and then be ChatGPT and then summarize it into 3 sentences. So
oh, wow.
I'm joking. Take it as a compliment that I really am excited about this class and the teachings. A lot of these things for me, from the Jain perspective and the detail that you're teaching them, are new. And I'm really, it's really so wonderful to see the way that they can be applied in contemporary life to generate more compassion and a more compassionate way of life. So I'm listening very closely to you, Shivani. And so, the first 3 classes, fantastic. We're learning how to be good listeners. We're learning how to take the rest that we need, the spiritual rest. We're learning how to let go of this objectification of the world and let something else emerge that's more probably close to what it is the best version of what a human can be. And then in class 4, Jainism and Compassion, you discussed the 9 lay resolutions. So this is the final part of the class, the 4th module. We've come to this point, and there are 9 lay resolutions that you describe from Ācārya Tulasī. Can you tell us about what these are? You don't have to list all 9 of them if you don't want, but you can just kind of give us a sense of what are these resolutions about, and how do they help encourage us to be more compassionate human beings?
So basically, these resolutions are, instead of having the Anurad vows, which are traditional vows in the Jain tradition, like the 12 vows for lay practices, which which is, of course, connected to religion, rituals, and practices of Jainism. But then in a modern context, Ācārya Tulasī wants to separate them from the religious strengths and how people can be, again, coming back to the same point. His whole goal was to make people responsible, to make individuals responsible. So he talks about the same things. These are all interrelated concepts, but this is the climax of the course. In this course, I will have readings from Hemchandra Acharya's Yoga Shastra, where he discusses 35 qualities of a Śrāvaka. So if you look at those 35 qualities, and then when we compare those with these 9 qualities that Ācārya Tulasī lays out, that's when we really develop the understanding that how modern a thinker Ācārya Tulasī was, how he had, assimilated the idea of the challenges of modernity and the real mental frame of people who visit him, of the Śrāvakas or individual in the society. So keeping all these things in mind, he, as I said that, when he says that we are always multitasking, so we are not mindful of our eating. This mindful eating is not just related to health or not eating junk food, but it is more about compassionate, developing self-compassion, how slowly you take a bite, how you actually relish each bite, each taste. It's not about being vegetarian. When he says mindful eating, of course, it is unsaid that Jains are vegetarian and they should be vegetarian, if not vegan, right? But this is, again, consciousness in eating food. Again, limiting the clothes. It's not about you gathering a lot of clothes and then you start distributing them. It is limiting yourself in even acquiring those clothes. So we can try in the class to do small experiment, like, for maybe a week, a month. For example, my requirement could be 3 pairs of jeans or bags or, shoes. Yours could be 5. Someone else could have 6 or 8, or someone could even have 2. So we can try this small experiment by, for at least for a month, we'll restrict and not accumulate more than my requirements. So we make a list of requirements. I remember, growing up in India with my grandmother, she always maintained a diary. She was illiterate. She didn't know how to read and write, but she would make us, like her grandchildren, make a list of things that she held, that she acquired. And if she increases, then it would come into that recording book. And if she gives away something, that would come. The moment we start writing our possessions, that's when we realize that, how much we are accumulating and how much we need to be mindful of not accumulating. Again, it is not a question of giving away, but it is a question of not accumulating. This is what, we want to develop in this class of compassion. Because when we talk about aparigraha, we think that, we have collected, now it's good to share, distribute, and give away. But we want to go more subtle, deeper, and understand the idea that these are 2 different things. Compassion comes when you are mindful of collecting. It comes when you are mindful of using electricity. It comes when you are mindful of your travel and avoid unnecessary travel. So these are some of the 9 points that Ācārya Tulasī lays down, that people, it's not taking a vow, it's not taking a resolution. It is to remind oneself to recite this every day so that you are more careful and aware of all your actions. And these are also an area where, as in the last class, we can experiment, with the students. All the 9 may not be relevant to each individual, but what is more relevant, how we can work around these 9 rules, and why Hemchandra Acharya gives 35 qualities of a Śrāvaka, why Ācārya Tulasī thought that in today's modern time, 35 qualities are way too difficult to practice. So he brings everything down to 9. So there are a lot of questions and things to discuss in each of these 4 modules, but the idea is to really understand the meaning of the word compassion and dharma, which Ācārya Tulasī wants the readers to know.
Yeah, and as I look through these 9 different resolutions, I really love when it comes to the ninth one. It says desiring to serve the community, prioritizing social responsibility and service. And I think built into that resolution and the others that were before it that you described is a deep commitment to self-compassion and then expanding that self-compassion out to others in the world. So I think this is such a wonderful place to end the class because it connects both compassion to self, social responsibility, and compassion to everyone around us and service to everyone around us. And as we come kind of towards the end of the podcast episode here, I did want to ask you that question just in general. I mean, you've given us so many tips here from the perspective of Ācārya Tulasī. Is there anything you can recommend? How can our listeners begin to develop more compassion in their lives right now? What's something they can do?
That's a very interesting question. So one thing that generally, I don't know from my experience of teaching in religious studies at the university, these young kids whom I interact more on a daily basis, they are in the course of religious studies, but most of them, they say that they are not religious and they don't, affiliate to any specific tradition or religion. They want to know about religions, that's okay, but they really are trying to divert themselves from affiliating to any specific tradition or to accepting the fact that they belong to certain faith tradition. So compassion is the only tool. I think, because non-violence has been so overexposed and it has been connected so much with religion and violence that the whole idea, I feel that the best part about non-violence or ahimsa is actually the outcome of non-violence is how compassion can be applied in your daily life, and which is just a tool that is universal, that has nothing to do with any religious tradition. You can be completely atheistic or non-theistic. You can be completely not accept a creator God or accept a creator God. That it has nothing to do with how you want to express compassion, how you want to cultivate the idea of compassion within you, your family, your friends, your peer groups. Or, compassion is one thing that is free from all the strings.
Beautiful. Yeah, one of the things that keeps coming up over and over again in this podcast interviews that we've been doing with all the people in the Compassion Studies Initiative is how compassion is on the one hand so deeply rooted in so many specific ways in all these traditions, the Jain tradition, other Dharma traditions, and even outside in like Christianity, in Islam and Judaism and other traditions, in very specific ways, in very particular languages and forms. And yet there's this kind of universal human capacity for compassion that transcends those specificities. So there's this kind of tension between the very specific ways that you're showing in your class and the others are showing in their class. But when it comes down to it, as you say, the students tend to be interested in just knowing, how can I be a more compassionate person? And I really think that all the classes in the Compassion Studies Initiative offer various angles on how we could do this. And yours is just so unique in that it brings Ācārya Tulasī's teachings from Hindi language, from Śrāvaka Saṃbodha, to now a global audience. So I can't tell you how much we appreciate that, Shivani, that you're offering this and that you've sat here with me today to tell us about some of these teachings and what we might be able to expect when your class comes out on the Arihanta Institute platform. Yeah, I didn't know. Was there anything else you wanted to share with our listeners before we go?
No, I think this is it. I just sometimes when I myself turn back and read the Śrāvaka Saṃbodha, I wonder that one of these 9 rules is focused reading. Ācārya Tulasī is asking people to read as one of the 9 rules, because the medieval Śrāvakacharya at that point, there were people who didn't even know how to read and write, and so that knowledge is still in the bhandaras. It's not come down to people unless they go and listen to discourse. But the idea that he's asking people to read, that really shows that how modern, in understanding the modern context, the whole text has been built, and it can be really useful in creating individual responsible citizens.
Wonderful. Yeah, it sounds like it really is trying to democratize these teachings for the global good, and they certainly will now because you're able to translate them for other people who might not otherwise have access to this text. So we thank you so much for coming to the Engaged Jain Studies podcast, Shivani Bothra from Cal State Long Beach, and we'll look forward to your class soon. Thank you so much.
Chris, the way you are putting, I am getting so excited to teach this course. While talking and while thinking about your questions gives me so many ideas. I'm actually really excited to now, developing this videos of the course.
Outstanding. Yeah.
I think the interview has really helped. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we'll look forward to seeing it come out soon. Thank you so much, Shivani.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone at Arihanta.
Thank you for listening to the Engaged Jain Studies podcast, brought to you by Arihanta Institute, an IRC 501c3 nonprofit California corporation. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, or better yet, tell a friend and share it with a colleague. At Arihanta Institute, we bridge ancient wisdom with contemporary living through accessible, self-paced online courses, free events, and a first-of-its-kind Master of Arts program in Engaged Jain Studies. Visit arihantainstitute.org to learn how our curriculum spanning Jain philosophy, social justice, veganism, environmental studies, and more can enrich your understanding of timeless principles in today's context. Jai Jinendra.